Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are looking at another update on the BR changes that are going to be implemented sometime in August, probably over the next week. Now, a lot of these changes haven't been put into the table, but they have been talked about by SMIN 1080p. There is updates number 3 and number 4. Looks like they're really listening to a lot of community feedback here, which is great, and also responding to it and talking about the different levels of it. This is something that many people have asked for a long time, and it is nice to see once again, when it comes to this battle racing changes, that we are getting clarifications on what is going on. This is absolutely wonderful. There is one change which has been actually added to the table which was not talked about, and that is the SU-7B. The SU-7B is actually going down in BR from 9.3 to 9.0, so similar to the Q5A, which is going down from 9.3 to 9.0. It's kind of showing that speed is not the only thing that is making these machines tick. Other factors also have to be taken into account. Don't really agree with the SU-7B going down, just because of the fact that 8.0s, especially stuff like the Sea Venom, which is going to be 8.0 soon, is not going to be able to deal with stuff like the SU-7B. There is nothing you're going to be able to do against it apart from defensively fly and hit ground targets, which isn't exactly always very fun, and it's not like you have missiles to be able to deal with them either, so I don't know how you're supposed to deal with them apart from doing that stuff. So that's the only change that's in the table. I'm sure many others will be added in the next week, and we'll probably have to do an updated BR video, but we'll see what goes on. Anyway, let's get into the changes. So the first part is about naval forces. So it says, firstly, regarding naval forces. In this release, we did not make any changes to the fleet's BR, but we still received very noticeable requests from you, including the separation of battleships from cruisers. The answer to them is this: we are working to raise the fleet's BR ceiling. Stay tuned and for news, and thanks for the feedback. This was obviously going to be something that's going to happen. You know, this is something that will happen over time. We've talked about it many times when it comes to BR ceilings and BR decompression. You need to add more vehicles, you need more people playing those vehicles in order to fill out those BRs, so the queue times are manageable, and then you can increase the BRs. So what will happen, which is what happened last time when they added the battleships, is they'll probably add a bunch of new ones, so therefore more people will be able to play them and grind them out, and then they'll increase the BR ceiling along with it, just like they did with stuff like the MiG-23M when they added it in Update Red Skies. My guess is this will happen in the next update. Last year we had a massive update when it came to battleships and dreadnoughts and all of these different things, and I'm sure we will have a very similar thing this year because of the leaks that we saw a few months ago. I'm sure they're looking to add more of these vehicles in. Unfortunately, it won't fix the issue that there is in Naval, because there is no fixing of the issue. Unfortunately, the way that cruisers are and the way that battleships are, there is massive power spikes between the different things. I advocated back in the day for a basic wall between jets and propeller aircraft, with some exceptions like the HE-162. I still believe in that idea, but it seems like it will never be possible, unfortunately, and it looks like Naval is going to have exactly the same issue. There's also some other additional changes from the feedback. The Ariete BR will be reduced from 11.0 to 10.7. I think this is fine. If you look at the Ariete compared to all the other 11.0s, it does have serious issues with it. The placement of the ammunition in the vehicle, the amount of armor that it has, the mobility is okay, the round is okay, but it is no longer best in class, which was the key factor for the Ariete back in the day. So reducing it down to 10.7 is fine, with the PSO being slightly lower. The Panzer IV-G for Italy, the BR will be reduced from 4.3 to 4.0, and 3.7 from 4.0 in RB. So basically moving it down to be a similar level to the one in the German tech tree, which is completely fine. As we've talked about many times, there are vehicles in different tech trees, which even if they are the same vehicle, they have different BRs. And the reason for this, especially in ground forces and naval, is because of the lineups that they have around them. The lineups are very key to the aspect of balancing, especially when it comes to modes which fully utilize them, and that's why you have different, the same vehicles in different nations which have different BRs. We also have some clarifications when it comes to specific vehicles. So it starts with the M1A1. At its current BR and position, the M1A1 is performing at an acceptable level without any immediate indications it is in need of ammunition changes or other adjustments. We have received several suggestions for new ammunition upgrade packages, which we are aware of, but at this time the tank shows no indication of a lack of performance compared to other contemporaries. If a situation arises after the current plan changes are implemented whereupon the next review, the tank has dropped as a result, various options can be considered and will closely follow the situation. But this will of course depend on a review of its position after we have had some time to review the effects of the current changes with the IPM-1. This is quite a funny statement because it's very PR, at least in my opinion. We have received several suggestions for new ammunition upgrade packages, which we are aware of. Like it's literally saying, look guys, we know about all of these things. Could you please be quiet about these things? Like we've already been through this. We know what's going on. Don't worry about it. We're not brain dead. And it's just funny how it's worded because it's worded in the nicest way possible. To also say that, and I may have a bit more of a direct approach when it comes to these things. So yeah, my theory, or at least what I thought when it came to the IPM-1 going up in BR, because I was like, why are they putting it up in BR but also giving it a new round? Surely if it's working really well at 10.0 and they want to put it up, maybe it doesn't need a new round straight away, but they're giving it the M900, as we all know, which is a very, very powerful round with a quick reload on the IPM-1. So maybe this is because the M1A1 is struggling and they're trying to bolster it, kind of like how the M48 in one of the last sets of BR changes for Germany was looking to go down to 6.7, but instead of doing that, they brought down stuff like the Leopard to try and help it out, and also the addition of the Marder as well, which I think definitely helped it. So I'm guessing that isn't the case with the M1A1. It's just doing well, and maybe the IPM-1 was doing better than expected at the 10.0 BR, and that's why they're pushing it up. I still think the standard M1 Abrams should get the M833 though. If it was working well for the IPM-1 at 10.0, it should work well for the M1 Abrams, but also now the M1 Abrams doesn't have a lineup as good around it as the IPM-1 did, so therefore it's going to need a bit of help. So the IPM-1 and the M1A1 lineup should be very good. Definitely looking forward to playing it, and it just seems like the IPM-1 was just doing really well. Then they have something on the Black Prince. A common suggestion is for this vehicle to be lowered in BR in realistic battles. Currently, however, among all heavy and medium tanks in RB at rank 4, the vehicle has the highest efficiency compared to its counterparts. At this time, the vehicle is currently not in any position to receive a lower BR based on how it is currently performing. The Black Prince is one of those very odd vehicles because it's one of those where if it gets up-tiered, its armor is not very good, just like a lot of heavy tanks, and if it's down-tiered, its armor is incredibly good. But it does also have the issue of being incredibly slow, but has a pretty nice gun on it. It's always going to be one of those vehicles which is kind of hard to balance, where it has a decent amount of armor, not a lot of speed, but it has a very good gun for its BR. So putting it down, it could definitely become a monster, but keeping it at its BR, if it gets up-tiered, it has issues. But depending on what the meta BRs are around the place, it may just have a really good time because it may generally play around its BR, and now it has stuff like the Centurion Mark 1 to go along with it, it will have a good time. So it's not surprising to see that the Black Prince is doing well right now, especially since it seems a lot of people like playing smaller maps, at least from what I've seen recently. So now the speed issue with it isn't as much of an issue. It's still a large one, but it's not as bad as if you were playing on stuff like stuff like Vietnam every other game. So I don't think its BR should be changed, but it's got the whole issue that a lot of heavy tanks have, where if they're fully up-tiered, they struggle. If they're fully down-tiered, they slam. So you don't want to make that even worse, otherwise you get a mouse situation and it gets removed from the game. Then the AMX-50 Surblindé. This wasn't really discussed that much apart from CCs, from what I saw. Basically because a lot of CCs have the vehicles because, they participated in World War mode in one stack and basically battered everybody. Because it's much easier to do that when, you can just call on the best players that are around the place. Currently, this vehicle is performing more effectively than its peer, the AMX-50 Surblindé, despite the latter being a lower rating. So reduction for the Surblindé would be illogical given the performance of both machines currently in game. And this is a classic example. This is a really good example of efficiency versus actual statistics. Actual, I suppose, parts of the vehicle. So if you just look at the Surblindé itself as a vehicle, it is one of those which is not... it's probably worse than the standard Surblindé, but it's at least very close when it comes to its general profile. And if you just look at them in a vacuum, you should think that they should be at least the same BR because of these facts. But if you add in the additional context, which is the only people who have the Surblindé are the people who played the World War mode back then and also did really well in that World War mode, so therefore they're either experienced or veteran players who have a competitive bent to them, then you can understand why it's performing better than the Surblindé, and this is going to continue to happen because these players are better. It's the same reason why stuff like the E100 back in the day had an insane repair cost. Maybe it still has an insane repair cost, I don't know. But it's the same reason. When you have these very, very unique vehicles, which only a very small percentage of the population have, and that percentage of the population is also on the higher skill level, your statistics are going to be very skewed in the upwards trajectory. Now, what do you do about that? Do you lower it because of the fact that its general stats are the same when it comes to like the gun, the mobility, the armor, and all of this stuff? Or do you follow the statistics? In my opinion, you follow the statistics, because if you do put this down, then that same group of players who want it to be pushed down are going to dominate in it, because they're already doing really well in it at its current BR. So instead of focusing on vehicle stats, it is much better to look at overall statistics of how the vehicle is being played. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to lead to situations where you have the people who are really good at the game also have the only meta-stomping vehicles. If you want the Surblindé to go down in BR, what you need to do is you need to open it up to the general community. You have to make it so it's available once again for people to grind, so therefore the stats will become more middling. And then we have the French Roland 1. The French Roland currently has an efficiency equal to that of the French Crotel NG and higher than that of the German Flak-Panzer. As such, there is no need to introduce any further ammunition upgrades to this machine at present that would further boost its performance when it's currently already at above sufficient levels. So the Roland is going up in BR with the Flak-Panzer. This is because both of these machines are really good. But I will hazard a guess at why the Roland is actually doing better than the Flak-Panzer. And the main reason is matchmaking. Generally, the German Flak-Panzer does not go up against G91s, unless they're Italian ones. It does not go up against R3s and R4s, which, are the primary AGM carriers that you see. It does go up against A4s. These are the two common vehicles that you see at these BRs just because of the AGMs, and therefore, the Roland goes up against all of them, because France at the tier doesn't really have great CAS aircraft compared to, other machines, apart from maybe the Étendard, but it's not the same as a G91 or an A4 or anything similar to that, like an FJ4B VMF. So the Roland has to counter all of those things, whereas the Flak-Panzer only maybe has to counter about half of those things because of general matchmaking. So that's probably why its performance is higher, if we just look at it from a holistic approach. Now, I could be completely wrong, it could be other reasons, but the other reasons, at least in my head, are pretty trivial and not really useful, like French players are generally better than German players. For me, that argument doesn't really help, and it doesn't really solve anything, because there's no way of really proving it from a statistical level when you don't have access to the statistics. Then we have the STRF 9040 bill. A lot of comparisons have been raised about specific attributes of the vehicle compared to others of a similar class or nature. It is important to understand that a vehicle can be inferior to the individual vehicles with which it is compared by some values or attributes, but at the same time have an efficiency that is still higher than your average on its BR. In this case, the STRF 9040's efficiency exceeds both the Bradley and Dardo. So basically, the 9040 bill is doing better than the Bradley and the Dardo, and this could be down to several factors, but it is just a fact that it is doing better. The bill, in my opinion, is a very strong vehicle, but compared to the Bradley and Dardo, I would rather have those than the bill, just because of its general use. The only thing the bill gets an advantage of over them is the HEVT, which can be life-saving, especially against helicopters, which generally move around the place. So I spaded the bill a while ago. I had a really good time with it. It's a really fun light vehicle, and I'm sure the Bradley and the Dardo are very similar. So there's once again two ways of looking at this. You can look at lineups. You could see, which lineups are generally better, or which ones are a little bit more focused. What is the bill being run with to increase its efficiency? That could definitely be true, but the Bradley lineup is incredibly good, so it's probably not that. The Dardo lineup isn't great, but it's still very, very good. And the bill one is also pretty nice at that BR. So for me, when I look at these three vehicles, the only other thing that could be true is you just have people enjoying or just doing better in the Swedish tree than on average compared to the Bradley and the Dardo, so the Italian and the American tree, which might be true, but it's very hard to prove without statistics, and once again, it's a very, very lazy argument. Then we have a bunch of clarifications when it comes to aviation. I am going to be skipping over the simulator specific stuff just because I don't really play too much of it, so can't really comment. So if you are interested in that, make sure to check them out. It's talking about the G91YS, the J72, and the F104G and J when it comes to simulator. When it comes to general aviation, this starts off with the Spitfire Mark 24. It will remain at its current BR, but will closely monitor the efficiency of this aircraft. As the number of aircraft have changed near this BR, we'll retain the current BR and review the situation in the next BR update. If it remains high in efficiency, it will be increased. So basically, it's doing really well right now, but because there's a lot of changes around it, they want to monitor it and see what goes on. I think that's completely fine. I do think the Mark 24 is the best propeller aircraft in the game. It flies supremely well, it's beautiful to play, and it's one of those which is really good at defensively flying against jets. The only things that really counter it when it comes to jets is stuff like the Meteor, and well, it's British, so it doesn't come up against it. Then similarly, the ME-163B-0 will remain at its current BR, but will also closely follow the efficiency of this aircraft. So once again, they're not making the change, but in the next set of BR updates, if it's doing as well as it is now, then it will go up. The Key 84 Hey will remain at its current BR, same idea there. So it looks like they are taking a lot of the feedback that has been given and doing that. Then the AV-8A, the Harrier for the Americans, will be increased to 9.7 BR based on your feedback. So a lot of people talking about that thing and wanting it to go up. Well, there you go. It's now up. The A6M5s, the Otsu and Hey, Currently, these aircraft are the leaders in terms of efficiency in their battle ratings. As such, the planned increase will take place. Not too much of a surprise, kind of sad, but you know, we've talked about how to fly A6M5s in the past. They're incredibly easy to fly, you know, and also at the same time, you know, they don't have the extra abilities of really being a ground pounder or anything like that, but they are really good at defensively flying, and if you engage them in turn fights, you will lose because you won't be able to keep up with the loss and gain of energy of the vehicles themselves. The only weird thing here is the CO isn't involved, which is a similar BR. The kicker: the aircraft currently suits its BR in terms of its characteristics and performance. I don't know who's advocating for the kicker to change in BR. The kicker is one of those weird vehicles where its stock performance is very different from its spaded performance. Its spaded performance is incredibly good, but it still handles like a brick, so you've got to be careful with that. And it also gets the 800 kilo bomb, making it very, very useful in ground realistic. And that is one of the big factors why I think it's pretty good. The CL-13 Mark IV, currently this aircraft has one of the best efficiencies for its BR, so a decrease is currently not possible. Not too much of a surprise here. You know, once again, this is a vehicle performance versus statistics argument, and as we've talked about many times in the past, statistics are always going to win. You know, because human perception of these things compared to what is actually happening is going to be completely off. Compared to what is happening overall. The H-34, though, it will be lowered to 8.0 based on your feedback. This is for the French and US one. Obviously, the event vehicle for the US, I think this is fine. You know, they're not great aircraft. They don't fly very well. They have very limited armament. I'm fine with the lower tier helicopters. They're actually quite fun to play with and play against. My main issue when it comes to the higher helicopters is the absolute maximum ones. You know, the K-50s, the Apaches, all of these, the ECs, the Tigers. These are very oppressive and can be, whereas the lower tier ones, they're a little bit of fun and also can influence a match if you're skilled enough. And yeah, they're a lot easier to deal with from the ground, so I'm generally fine with them. The final amendment will be the reduction of in RB for the EC-665 Tiger HAP helicopter, which is good in terms of characteristics, but its main anti-tank weapon, the Hot 380 GEM, is inferior in performance characteristics to analogs of the armed Hellfire, decreased from 10.3 to 10.0, so that's fair. I mean, let's see how well it does. I suppose it may go up in the future if it does really well. The main problem I'm seeing when it comes to dealing with CAS in general is a lot of the machines which you normally deal with CAS with are going up in BR at the higher tiers. So that may leave a gap which already exists at 879093 for a lot of AGM carriers to dominate, and it is very, very annoying to deal with them when you don't have stuff like missile AA. If you only have gun AA, then G91s and A4s and scimitars and even etendards can tear you apart. The way I would fix this is actually just making it so with AGMs you actually have to hit targets instead of near them. That would be a great first step. One of the surprise additions to this is the Centurion Mark V AVRE. This has become even more dangerous with the introduction of the overpressure mechanic in War Thunder. Its 165mm cannon is now very difficult to resist, so in arcade battles, where it is much easier to aim with it, the vehicle will be slightly increased, from 7.3 to 7.7. Tanks with guns with low ballistic performance have a number of disadvantages: aim shooting at long distances, projectile flight time, and its trajectory, which create problems in realistic battles. Such units are much more effective in arcade battles, and most often they have weapons that shoot powerful high explosive shells, one hit of which on average is enough to destroy most opponents at its rank and even higher. At the moment, the Centurion has shown itself to be a very effective tank in AB at the current battle rating, and therefore deservedly moves to the Major League, that is, gets a higher BR rating. This tank will not lose its destructive power, but some of the tanks, which were frankly weak in the event of encounters with it, will receive some improvements in the situation. So yeah, the AVRE in AB is moving from 7.3 to 7.7, but it is staying its current BR in RB. This isn't a surprise. It's a donkey gun, which is very good at what it does. Kind of the same with the FV4005 and other similar machines like the Brumbar. So now it'll be a little bit easier for people to fight, but once again, in RB it won't make a difference. The IS-6 is also going down. Some of your comments mentioned a decrease in survivability with the appearance of an increasing number of opponents with heat shells. The statistics agree with this, and the tank will be reduced in RB. So the IS-6 is now going down to 7.0, along with the IS-3, and also the Object 268, which I actually think is getting dropped again to 6.7. I saw a lot of people being very surprised that the 268 is getting dropped, or at least, sorry, I should check that. I believe it's being dropped to 6.7, if I remember that correctly. Yes, it is. And all I can say is, you know the Jagdtiger exists, right? And it pretty much has exactly the same role as the 268 in its general characteristics, and that's already at 6.7. It turns out big guns with long reloads with, armor on the front of them doesn't necessarily mean success, even in the form of the 268, which has a nice secondary armament. But once you take out the gun, it takes ages to repair, or once you get around the side of it, or track it, or do whatever you want, or just bomb it, it doesn't do very well. The IS-3 is a different case because it does have a turret and also has good maneuverability. I'm worried about the IS-6 going down. I'm not really a fan of it facing stuff which is at 6.0. There's not really a lot you can do against it, just like the IS-3. I disagreed with the IS-3 going down to 7.0, but it seems like it's staying there, so maybe its efficiency is not as high as I personally thought it was. Hopefully the IS-6 doesn't take over the game. I don't think it will. I think it's just... I remember an IS-6 which was trailblazing in its time, and the IS-6 of today is definitely not that one because it's been through several changes to changes. And then the T55AM is actually being discussed. So we also received comments on the effectiveness of the T55AM. Our data suggests that the machine is efficient and in place, but the standard T55A will be reduced to 8.0. The AM1, so the T55AM1, is currently performing as intended at 8.3, having an efficiency indicator corresponding to the average value at its rank. But having paid attention to the T55A, we observe it's significantly lagging behind in efficiency from the T55AM1. Well, it's not a surprise. The AM1 is just a direct upgrade over the damn thing, with an equal number of battles fought. Therefore, it was decided not to change the battle rating of the T55AM1 with balanced efficiency, but to reduce the combat rating of the T55A, along with it the American M60A1 AOS and the German 48A2 GA2, which are somewhat inferior in efficiency to the T55A. In fact, we've considered many more of your proposals, but there are several that greatly conflict. For example, although the premium German TAM2IP differs from the researchable TAM in terms of performance characteristics and weapons, this does not help the indicated light tank, and statistically both vehicles are very close. So when we have a look at the T55AM example, it is not a surprise to me to see that the T55AM is doing well, but I always don't like the fact that you have a direct upgrade of a vehicle at the same BR as another vehicle, especially when one of them is premium in the form of the T55AM1, because that basically means you can pay for power at that BR. So to see the T55A go down is fine. I'm okay with this. I thought the T55A was a completely okay vehicle. Suffers a little bit in the stock grind, but it's not huge. The M60A1 AOS going down, not a surprise. Same with the German 48A2 GA2. What I've got to say is right now, from my experiences of playing around the BRs, 9.0 is incredibly strong, and so is 9.3. And the German 9.0 is insanely strong. A lot of other nations' 9.0s are very strong, but the Soviet 9.0 is not very strong at all. At 8.7 you have a ton of light tanks, and then at 9.3 you have stuff like the T-72 and T-64, which are pretty good, but you don't see them too much if you're playing that 8.3 bracket. So what ends up happening at 8.3, in my experience, is you get 9.0 to 8.0 matchmaking. So what happens is you go up against a lot of those 9.0s, or maybe you get 9.3, 8.3 matchmaking, and then the whole enemy team is 9.0s, and you go up against stuff like Radkampfwagens, L-44s, 1A5s, TAMs, TAM-2IPs. All of these machines come in, and they are superior to your vehicles, and they are really, really good at fighting you. So to see these 3 basic MBTs get dropped in BR down to the 8.0 level, I think this is good to try and get them away from that 9.0 bracket, which is supremely strong for a lot of nations, including nations like Italy. Whether it's going to work or not, we'll have to see, but for me, personally, I think this is fine. Then the TAM-2IP and the TAM thing, like, yes, they have different abilities, but statistically they're the same, so player statistically they're the same or close to. That's fine, but in regards to stuff like these, I would much prefer if they were swapped. So like the standard TAM was the premium, and then the TAM-2IP was the tech tree one, just because of the fact that once again, giving a vehicle premium, and also, you know, everybody having access to it to spend money on it, and at the same time having access to technically better equipment in a way, when it comes to its armor, when it comes to other factors, it leaves a bad taste in the mouth. Separately, we would like to touch upon the issue of the reduction of the T-3485 D5T. To explain this, let's use a simple comparison with vehicles of the same battle rating. For the D5T modification, these are the Tiger H1 and Panther D, the effectiveness of which, according to the stats, is at the level of similar heavy and medium tanks. At the same time, the effectiveness of the T-3485 D5T is noticeably inferior to other medium tanks on its BR, and this is the main reason for the decrease in the BR of this particular vehicle. You also actively recommended lowering the battle rating for similar modifications of the famous T-34, since some of them are not much different from the version in question, the D5T. In fact, the differences turned out to be significant, which ultimately significantly affects the overall efficiency in battle, and with it, the statistics, the gap between which is noticeable. These same variants are doing rather well statistically, so they do not require changes from their current BRs at this time. So pretty much the D5T is going down because it's performing worse than the other T-3485s. If they're referencing the standard T-3485, I can understand that. They do perform slightly differently in game, and it's much easier to use the T-3485. If they're talking about it compared to the Chinese versions, then obviously the Chinese versions have a different lineup. The 5.7 lineup for China is stupidly strong. It's one of my favorite BRs to play. You got a Hellcat, you got an M36, you got T-3485s, you got an IS-2, you got a P-51K, you got a TU-2. It's a banger lineup, and one of my go-tos when it comes to doing the events like we've been doing recently. So not a surprise to see it doing well. We'll have to see with the D5T how it does. I believe there's a few, or at least one vehicle at 5.0 to see, you know, what's going on. So hopefully we'll see how it does. I haven't played the D5T in a while, so I'm guessing the Panthers that got brought down probably beat it up a little bit, especially after the volumetric shell changes, so it's a little bit harder to aim the gun, but we'll have to see how it does. Anyway, those are the BR changes that are going to be implemented sometime in August. They're not in the table yet, but I'm sure they will be eventually, and if there's any additional ones, we'll make sure to discuss them too. As always, hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.